I never thought I'd be sitting here at 64 years old, having to defend my character against rumors that paint me as some kind of violent, unstable person. But that's exactly where I found myself last Tuesday morning when I opened my laptop and discovered something that made my blood run cold. My name is Margaret Thompson. I'm 64 years old, and what I'm about to tell you is absolutely true and will leave you speechless. Please like and subscribe. Tell me which city you call home, because what started as a routine morning checking my emails turned into the most devastating betrayal I've experienced in decades. It all began when I was helping my daughter, Sarah Thompson, organize some old files on her computer. Sarah had been staying with me for the past month while her apartment was being renovated, and we'd been going through family photos and documents together. She's 38 now, works as a marketing coordinator, and has always been my closest confidant. We have this wonderful tradition of having coffee together every morning before she heads to work, just talking about life and sharing our thoughts. That particular morning, Sarah had asked me to help her clean up her email inbox while she got ready for an important presentation. She'd left her laptop open on the kitchen table, and I was dutifully deleting old promotional emails when I accidentally clicked on her recently deleted folder instead of the trash icon. That's when I saw it. A forwarded email chain with my name in the subject line. The sender was Linda Kellerman, someone I've considered one of my dearest friends for over 15 years. Linda and I met at a community gardening club back in 2009, and we've been practically inseparable ever since. We take morning walks together 3 times a week. We've traveled to 4 different states together, and I've confided in her about everything from my late husband's battle with cancer to my worries about Sarah's career choices. She's been like a sister to me, someone I trusted completely. But there it was, plain as day. Linda had forwarded an email to Sarah with the subject line, "Concerns about your mother's behavior." My hands were shaking as I opened it, and what I read inside made me feel like the floor had dropped out from under me. Linda had written a detailed message describing me as increasingly volatile and unpredictably aggressive, claiming that I'd had angry outbursts during our walks and that she was genuinely worried about my mental state. The worst part wasn't just that Linda was spreading these lies, it was that she was targeting my own daughter with them. The email went on to suggest that Sarah should keep an eye on me and maybe encourage me to seek professional help for what Linda called my concerning behavioral changes. She even mentioned specific incidents that were complete fabrications, like claiming I'd yelled at a store clerk the previous week when we'd gone shopping together. That never happened. I'm known for being polite to service workers, sometimes to a fault. Sarah came into the kitchen just as I was reading the most hurtful part, where Linda wrote, "I've been friends with your mother for years, but lately I'm almost afraid to be around her when she gets upset. She has this look in her eyes that's just not normal." I must have made some kind of noise because Sarah looked at me with immediate concern. "Mom, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost?" she said, setting down her coffee mug and coming over to look at the screen. I couldn't even speak at first. Here was my so-called best friend, systematically poisoning my relationship with my own daughter behind my back. And the cruelest part was that everything she wrote was designed to sound caring and concerned, like she was just a worried friend looking out for Sarah's well-being. "Sarah, honey, I need to ask you something very important," I finally managed to say. "Have you been talking to Linda about me? About my behavior or my mental state?" Sarah's face went through several emotions: confusion, then recognition, then what looked like guilt. She sat down heavily in the chair next to me and let out a long sigh. "Mom, I was going to talk to you about this. Linda has been calling me every few days for the past month, telling me these stories about things you've supposedly said and done. At first, I didn't want to believe her, but she seemed so sincere, so worried about you. She kept saying she was only telling me because she cares about you and wants to make sure you're okay. My heart felt like it was breaking into 1,000 pieces. Not only had Linda betrayed our friendship, but she'd managed to plant seeds of doubt in my own daughter's mind about my stability and character. I could see it in Sarah's eyes. She'd been watching me, analyzing my behavior, waiting for signs of this supposed volatility that Linda had warned her about. That's when I remembered James Morrison, my neighbor from 3 houses down. James is retired like me, and we often chat when we're both out getting our mail or working in our yards. He's always been a straight shooter, someone who tells it like it is, without sugarcoating anything. If Linda was spreading rumors about me being violent and unpredictable, I had a feeling James might have heard something. "I think I need to make a phone call," I told Sarah, my voice steadier than I felt inside. One small detail blew the whole thing open. I was reaching for my phone when Sarah put her hand on mine, stopping me. "Mom, wait. Before you call anyone, I need to tell you something else." Sarah's voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "Linda didn't just call me. She also contacted Dad." My blood ran cold. Sarah's father and I had divorced 15 years ago, but we maintained a cordial relationship for Sarah's sake. We rarely spoke, unless it was about something important concerning our daughter. "What did she tell him?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "She called him last week and told him she was concerned about your mental health. She said you'd been having angry outbursts and that she was worried about me being around you alone. Dad called me right after to ask if I was okay, if I needed to come stay with him for a while." The betrayal cut even deeper now. Linda hadn't just been content to poison my relationship with Sarah. She'd reached out to my ex-husband, someone who already had complicated feelings about our past, and tried to make him question my fitness as a mother. "And what did you tell him?" I managed to ask. "I told him I was fine, that you seemed the same as always to me. But Mom, I have to admit, after Linda kept calling with more stories, I started second-guessing myself. I started watching you differently, looking for signs of what she was describing." I could see the guilt written all over Sarah's face, and it broke my heart that she'd been put in this position. "Honey, you don't need to feel bad about that. Linda is very convincing when she wants to be. She's had years of practice manipulating situations to her advantage." Sarah looked surprised. "What do you mean? I thought you two were best friends." I realized that Sarah had only seen the surface of my friendship with Linda. She'd seen us laughing together at family barbecues, going to movies, taking weekend trips. She hadn't seen the subtle ways Linda always had to be the center of attention, how she'd get jealous when I made other friends, or how she had a talent for stirring up drama and then positioning herself as the peacemaker. "We've been friends for a long time," I said carefully. "But looking back, I'm starting to see patterns I ignored. Linda has always needed to control the narrative in her relationships. If she feels like she's losing influence with someone, she finds ways to create problems that make her indispensable." Sarah frowned. "But why would she do this to you? What could she possibly gain from making people think you're unstable?" That was the question I'd been asking myself. As I thought about it, recent events started falling into place. 3 months ago, Linda had suggested we take a cruise together for our birthdays. I'd been excited about it until I learned she'd invited 2 other women from our book club without asking me first. When I told her I'd prefer a smaller group and suggested we plan something else, she'd seemed hurt and angry, though she tried to hide it. "I think this started when I told her I didn't want to go on that cruise she planned," I said slowly. "Linda doesn't handle rejection well, even when it's not personal. She probably decided that if I was going to be difficult, she'd find ways to make me the problem. Sarah shook her head in disbelief. That's so twisted, Mom. How could someone do that to a friend? Before I could answer, my phone rang. I looked at the screen and my stomach dropped. It was Linda. Don't answer it, Sarah said immediately. No, I think I should, but I want you to stay here and listen. I need a witness to whatever she's about to say. I answered the phone and put it on speaker. Linda's voice filled the kitchen, syrupy sweet and full of false concern. Oh, honey, I'm so glad you answered. I've been worried sick about you. I heard from a little bird that Sarah might have mentioned our conversations to you, and I wanted to make sure you understood that everything I've said has come from a place of love and concern. The audacity of it took my breath away. Even now, caught red-handed, Linda was trying to spin the situation to make herself look like the caring friend and me, like the unstable one who was overreacting. Sarah's eyes went wide as she heard Linda's manipulative tone firsthand. Linda, I said, keeping my voice calm and level. I saw the Facebook messages you sent to Sarah, all of them. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Linda spoke again, her voice had changed. The sweetness was gone, replaced by something colder. Well, then you know that everything I said was true. You have been acting strangely lately, and someone needed to look out for Sarah's well-being since you clearly weren't thinking clearly. Sarah's mouth fell open at the brazen gaslighting, and I felt a surge of clarity. This was exactly who Linda really was, and I'd been making excuses for her behavior for years. But what Linda said next revealed something that made me realize this situation was far more serious than I'd initially thought. I've already talked to the people at your church, Linda continued, her voice taking on a vindictive edge. Pastor Johnson was very concerned when I explained how erratic you've become. And I mentioned to several people at the community center that they should be careful around you. I told them about that time you threw the coffee mug. My blood ran cold. The coffee mug incident she was referring to had happened 6 months ago during one of our book club meetings at my house. I'd been washing dishes while we talked, and when Linda made a particularly cutting comment about another member who wasn't there to defend herself, I'd gotten frustrated and accidentally knocked a mug off the counter. It had fallen into the sink and chipped. That was it. A minor accident born of momentary clumsiness, now twisted into evidence of violent tendencies. But what terrified me wasn't just the lie itself. It was the calculated way Linda had weaponized a nothing moment and spread it throughout my community. These weren't just idle gossips or acquaintances she'd told. These were places where I was known, where I volunteered, where my reputation actually mattered. Sarah was staring at me with wide eyes, clearly understanding the implications. I could see her connecting the dots, realizing that this wasn't just about a few Facebook messages. This was a systematic campaign designed to isolate me and damage my standing in the community. Linda, I said, my voice shaking despite my efforts to stay calm. You know that's not what happened with the mug. You were right there. You saw it fall into the sink. Linda laughed, and the sound made my skin crawl. Oh, honey, that's not how I remember it at all. You were so angry that day. We were all worried about you. The gaslighting was so blatant, so cruel, that for a moment I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. Had I misremembered? No. I knew what had happened. But Linda's confidence in her lie was so absolute that I could understand how others might believe her version. Sarah grabbed my hand and squeezed it, grounding me. She'd heard the truth in my voice and the manipulation in Linda's. Having that validation from my daughter kept me tethered to what I knew was real. "You're lying," Sarah said suddenly, speaking directly into the phone. "My mom is not violent." "She's never been violent. What you're doing is sick." "Sarah, sweetheart," Linda's voice dripped with false sympathy. "I know this is hard to hear about your mother, but adults sometimes see things that children don't notice." The condescending tone she used with my 26-year-old daughter was the final straw. Whatever hold Linda's friendship had on me snapped completely in that moment. This wasn't about a misunderstanding or hurt feelings over a cruise. This was about control and punishment, and Linda was willing to destroy my reputation to get it. "We're done, Linda," I said firmly. "Don't contact me again." "You're proving my point right now," Linda shot back. "This explosive reaction, this inability to handle feedback. Everyone I've talked to said you'd respond exactly like this." I hung up before she could say another word, my hands trembling as I set the phone down on the kitchen table. The silence that followed felt deafening. Sarah immediately pulled me into a hug. "Mom, she's completely toxic. You did the right thing." But as I stood there in my daughter's arms, my mind was racing through all the implications of what Linda had just revealed. She'd talked to people at my church, where I helped with the food drive every month. She'd spread rumors at the community center, where I taught literacy classes twice a week. How many people had she poisoned against me? How long would it take for these lies to reach everyone I knew? The worst part was that I could already see how it would play out. When people heard Linda's version of events, my hanging up on her would look like exactly the kind of unstable behavior she'd been describing. My attempts to defend myself would be seen as further proof that I was difficult and unpredictable. I pulled back from Sarah's hug, feeling overwhelmed by the scope of what I was facing. What am I supposed to do now? How do I fight something like this? Before Sarah could answer, I heard a key turning in the front door. My heart sank as I realized what time it was. My mother Margaret was arriving for our weekly Sunday dinner, and she was about to walk into the middle of this nightmare. The familiar sound of my mother's footsteps echoed through the hallway, each step measured and deliberate as always. Margaret had a way of announcing her presence without saying a word. The careful placement of her purse on the entry table, the gentle closing of the door. The pause as she removed her Sunday shoes and lined them up perfectly against the wall. "Hello, dear," she called out, her voice carrying that particular warmth she reserved for family gatherings. "Something smells wonderful in here." I exchanged a panicked glance with Sarah. The pot roast I'd started hours ago was still simmering away in the slow cooker, filling the house with the comforting aroma of home-cooked Sunday dinner. But everything else about this day had gone completely sideways, and I wasn't sure how to explain the emotional wreckage that Linda had just left in her wake. Sarah squeezed my shoulder reassuringly as Margaret appeared in the kitchen doorway, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the October wind outside. She wore her favorite navy cardigan, the one I'd given her last Christmas, and carried the small covered dish that always accompanied her Sunday visits, usually her famous dinner rolls or a dessert she'd spent the morning perfecting. One look at my face, however, and her grandmother's intuition kicked in immediately. The warm smile faded into concern as she set her dish on the counter and studied both Sarah and me with those sharp blue eyes that had always been able to see straight through to the heart of any problem. "What's happened?" she asked simply, crossing to the kitchen table where my phone still lay like an accusation. "You both look like you've seen a ghost." The question hung in the air, and I felt the weight of having to explain Linda's betrayal all over again. My throat felt raw from the phone call, and my hands were still shaking slightly from the adrenaline of finally confronting her. How do you tell your own mother that someone you trusted has been systematically destroying your reputation behind your back? Sarah jumped in before I could find my voice. Grandma, you're not going to believe what just happened. Linda called, and she basically admitted to spreading lies about Mom all over town. Margaret's expression shifted from concern to something much sterner. She pulled out one of the kitchen chairs and sat down deliberately, folding her hands on the table in that way that meant she was prepared to hear the whole story and wouldn't be moving until she had all the facts. Tell me everything, she said, looking directly at me with the kind of steady presence that had gotten our family through countless crises over the years. I sank into the chair across from her, suddenly feeling exhausted by the emotional roller coaster of the past hour. The kitchen that had always been my sanctuary, with its warm yellow walls and the herb garden visible through the window, felt different now, tainted by the knowledge of what Linda had been doing while I'd been going about my normal life, completely oblivious. She's been telling people at church and the community center that I'm violent and unpredictable, I began, the words feeling surreal as I spoke them aloud. She made it sound like she's been concerned about me for months, like she's been watching me spiral out of control. Margaret's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she remained silent, encouraging me to continue with just a slight nod. It all started when I couldn't go on that cruise with her and Bob. I had to use my vacation days when Sarah was in the hospital, remember? But Linda took it personally, like I was deliberately trying to ruin her trip. The memory of that conversation felt like it had happened years ago instead of just a few weeks. I thought she understood, but apparently she's been holding a grudge this whole time. Sarah moved to stand behind my chair, her hands resting protectively on my shoulders. Grandma, you should have heard her on the phone. She was so manipulative, acting like she was this concerned friend who was just trying to help. But then she let it slip that she'd been talking to people, spreading these stories about Mom being difficult to deal with. Margaret's eyes flashed with something I recognized from my childhood. The particular brand of anger she reserved for people who hurt her family. It wasn't hot or explosive, but rather cold and calculating, the kind of fury that led to decisive action rather than emotional outbursts. What exactly has she been telling people? Margaret asked, her voice carefully controlled. I took a shaky breath, trying to remember Linda's exact words through the haze of shock and hurt. She said I've been having angry outbursts, that I'm unstable and hard to be around. She made it sound like she's been trying to help me, but that I refused to listen to feedback about my behavior. The worst part was how plausible it all sounded when Linda said it. She'd crafted her lies with just enough concern and specificity to make them believable to people who didn't know me well. And by positioning herself as the worried friend, she'd made it almost impossible for anyone to question her motives. Margaret was quiet for a long moment, processing everything I'd told her. Outside the kitchen window, I could see the leaves on the old oak tree rustling in the afternoon breeze, some of them already turning the deep reds and golds of autumn. It was the kind of peaceful Sunday scene that should have filled me with contentment. But instead, it felt like I was watching normal life from behind glass, separated from it by Linda's betrayal. How long has this been going on? Margaret finally asked. I don't know for sure, I admitted. She made it sound like it's been weeks, maybe since right after I told her I couldn't go on the cruise. I've been completely clueless, going to church and the community center like nothing was wrong, while she's been poisoning people against me. The humiliation of it was almost worse than the anger. I thought about all the interactions I'd had recently, the slightly cooler greeting from one of the church ladies, the way conversations seemed to stop when I walked into the volunteer coordination meeting last week. I'd attributed it to people having off days or being distracted by their own problems, never imagining that someone I trusted was actively working to undermine my relationships. Margaret reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Her touch was warm and steady, grounding me in the same way Sarah's support had during the phone call. "What did you say to Linda when she called?" she asked. "I told her we were done and hung up on her," I said, immediately second-guessing that decision. But now I'm worried that's exactly what she wanted. She said my reaction would prove her point about me being unstable and unable to handle feedback. Sarah's hands tightened on my shoulders. "Mom, you can't think like that. She was being awful. Anyone would have hung up on her." But I could see the trap Linda had set so carefully. By goading me into an emotional response, she'd created more evidence for her narrative about my supposedly volatile personality. And the more I tried to defend myself or set the record straight, the more defensive and unstable I would appear to people who had already heard her version of events. Margaret was studying me with that intense focus she brought to solving problems, and I could practically see her mind working through the implications and possibilities. She'd raised 4 children largely on her own after my father died, and she'd navigated more than her share of social politics and small-town drama over the years. "The question now," she said slowly, "is what we're going to do about it." The weight of Margaret's words settled over us like a heavy blanket. What were we going to do about it? The question hung in the air while I stared down at my coffee, watching the cream swirl in patterns that reminded me of storm clouds. "I keep thinking I should call people," I said finally. "Try to explain my side of things. But then I imagine how that conversation would go. Me calling up church members to tell them that Linda is lying about me being violent. It sounds crazy even saying it." Sarah moved around to sit in the chair across from me, her face serious in a way that made her look older than her years. "What exactly did Linda tell people? Do we know the specific things she's been saying?" I tried to recall Jennifer's careful words from the phone call earlier. Something about me having anger issues, being unpredictable. She apparently told people I had some kind of outburst when she couldn't go on the cruise with me, which is completely false. I was disappointed, sure, but I just said I understood, and that we'd do something else another time. The afternoon light streaming through Margaret's kitchen window had shifted, casting longer shadows across the worn wooden table. I could hear the distant sound of children playing in someone's backyard, their laughter a sharp contrast to the heaviness of our conversation. It made me think of all the Sunday afternoons I'd spent here over the years, usually discussing much lighter topics: Sarah's school projects, Margaret's garden, plans for holidays. Never anything like this. Margaret got up and refilled her coffee cup, moving with the deliberate precision she always showed when she was thinking hard about something. "The thing about rumors," she said as she settled back into her chair, "is that they have a life of their own. The more you chase after them trying to correct them, the more attention you draw to the whole mess. So I should just let Linda destroy my reputation?" The frustration in my voice was sharp enough that Sarah reached across to squeeze my hand. "I didn't say that," Margaret replied calmly. "But rushing into damage control mode might make things worse. People who know you, really know you, won't believe this nonsense. The ones who do believe it..." She shrugged. "Maybe they weren't really your friends to begin with." I wanted to argue with that logic, but part of me knew she was right. Still, the thought of Linda's poison spreading through my social circles made my chest feel tight. "I've been volunteering at the community center for 3 years. I've helped organize church fundraisers, baked for bake sales, driven people to doctor's appointments. How can anyone think I'm some kind of unstable person?" "Because people love drama," Sarah said bitterly. It's more interesting to believe someone has a secret dark side than to accept that they're just a normal person who had a disagreement with a friend. Margaret nodded approvingly at her granddaughter. Exactly. And Linda knows that. She's counting on people being more interested in gossip than in truth. The realization hit me then, sudden and cold. This isn't just about the cruise, is it? Linda planned this. She's been looking for an excuse to... I trailed off, not sure how to finish the sentence. To what? Destroy our friendship? Hurt me deliberately? The Linda I thought I knew wouldn't do something so calculating and cruel. But then again, the Linda I thought I knew wouldn't have made that vicious phone call either. What are you thinking? Margaret asked, studying my face. I'm thinking I never really knew Linda at all, I said slowly. And if that's true, then I have no idea what she might do next. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting longer shadows across Margaret's porch, and I found myself staring at the way the light filtered through the oak tree's leaves. It reminded me of countless summer afternoons I'd spent here as a child, when the biggest problem in my world was whether we'd have enough daylight left to catch fireflies. Now, sitting in that same spot as an adult, I felt like I was navigating territory I'd never prepared for. You know what bothers me most? I said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between us. It's not even that Linda is saying these things about me. It's that I'm starting to question everything about our friendship. Was she always this way? Did I miss signs? Was I just naive? Sarah shifted in her chair, tucking one leg underneath her. Maybe you weren't naive. Maybe she changed. People do that sometimes. Margaret made a soft humming sound that I recognized as her thinking noise. Or maybe Linda's going through something difficult and she's lashing out. That doesn't excuse what she's doing, mind you, but it might explain it. You're giving her an awful lot of credit, I said, feeling a familiar surge of irritation. She called me unstable, Margaret. She told people I have anger issues. That's not someone having a bad day. That's deliberate character assassination. The words hung in the air between us, heavier than I'd intended. Sarah reached for her grandmother's hand, and I watched the easy way Margaret squeezed back, the unconscious gesture of comfort that spoke to decades of shared understanding. I envied that certainty, that unshakable foundation they had with each other. What if she doesn't stop? I asked, voicing the fear that had been growing in my chest all afternoon. What if this is just the beginning? What if she escalates? Margaret leaned forward, her expression serious. Then we deal with that when it happens. But right now, you're borrowing trouble from tomorrow. Today's problems are big enough without adding imaginary ones to the pile. Grandma's right, Sarah said, though I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. And besides, you're not alone in this. Whatever Linda does next, we'll figure it out together. The simple declaration hit me harder than I'd expected. I'd been so focused on Linda's betrayal that I'd almost forgotten what loyalty looked like. Here were two people who barely knew the details of my friendship with Linda, yet they were offering their unconditional support without question. I don't know how to move forward from this, I admitted. Do I confront her directly? Do I try to set the record straight with mutual friends? Do I just pretend nothing happened and hope it blows over? Margaret stood up and began collecting our empty coffee cups, her movements deliberate and methodical. Those are all reasonable options, she said. But before you decide anything, you need to figure out what you're hoping to achieve. Do you want to salvage the friendship? Do you want an apology? Do you just want her to stop spreading rumors? I want my friend back, I said without thinking, then immediately felt foolish. But I guess that's not really possible anymore, is it? Even if she apologized tomorrow, how could I ever trust her again? Sarah pulled her knees up to her chest, making her look younger than her years. Maybe that's okay, though. Maybe some friendships have expiration dates, and trying to force them past that point just makes everything worse. Her words stung because they rang true. I'd been clinging to the idea that Linda and I could work through this, that our years of friendship meant something. But sitting here on Margaret's porch, surrounded by the kind of genuine care I'd taken for granted, I realized that maybe the relationship I'd been fighting to save had already been over for longer than I wanted to admit. The hardest part is accepting that someone you trusted could turn on you like this, I said. It makes me wonder what else I've been blind to. Margaret paused in her cup collecting, looking directly at me. Don't let Linda's choices make you doubt your own judgment about everything else. That's giving her too much power. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text message. My stomach dropped when I saw Linda's name on the screen. The three of us froze as my phone continued to buzz insistently on the small patio table. Linda's name glowed on the screen like an accusation, and I felt my carefully rebuilt composure start to crumble. You don't have to look at it right now, Sarah said quietly, but her eyes were fixed on the phone with the same fascination as someone watching a car accident unfold. Margaret set the coffee cups back down and returned to her chair. But if you want to read it, we're here with you. Sometimes it's easier to face difficult things when you're not alone. I picked up the phone with trembling fingers, my thumb hovering over the message notification. What if it's more accusations? What if she's figured out that I know what she's been saying and she's trying to get ahead of it somehow? Then we'll deal with whatever it says together, Margaret said firmly. But right now you're working yourself up over something that might be completely mundane. She could be texting about anything. Taking a deep breath, I opened the message. My eyes scanned the words once, then again, trying to process what I was reading. Well? Sarah asked, leaning forward in her chair. What does it say? I looked up at both of them, feeling more confused than ever. She's asking if I want to grab lunch tomorrow. She says she feels like we haven't talked in a while and she misses our conversations. Margaret raised an eyebrow. That's either remarkably tone-deaf or remarkably calculated. I don't understand, I said, staring at the message again. How can she send something like this after everything she's been saying about me? Either she doesn't know that I know, or she's playing some kind of game that I can't figure out. Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Maybe she genuinely doesn't realize how her words have been affecting you. Some people compartmentalize like that. They can talk badly about someone behind their back and still consider them a friend. That's not friendship, I said, anger flaring in my chest. That's manipulation. You're right, Margaret said. But the question now is how you want to respond. This could be an opportunity to address the situation directly, in person, where she can't hide behind rumors or secondhand conversations. I set the phone down and rubbed my temples, feeling a headache building behind my eyes. I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of confrontation. What if she denies everything? What if she turns it around on me somehow? Then you'll know where you stand, Sarah said. Right now you're stuck in this limbo where you know she's been talking about you, but you haven't given her a chance to explain herself or make it right. Maybe that's what you need before you can really move on. Or maybe I'll just end up more hurt than I already am, I countered. There's something to be said for just quietly stepping back from the friendship instead of creating more drama. Margaret leaned back in her chair, studying me carefully. What does your gut tell you to do? I closed my eyes and tried to listen to the voice beneath all the anger and confusion. I want answers, I said finally. I want to understand how someone I trusted could say those things about me. I want to know if our entire friendship has been a lie. Those are fair things to want, Sarah said. But you have to be prepared for the possibility that her answers won't be what you're hoping to hear. I know, I said, opening my eyes. But I think the not knowing is worse than whatever the truth might be. My phone buzzed again with another message from Linda. This time, it was shorter. I really hope you can make it tomorrow. I feel like something's been off between us lately, and I'd like to clear the air. The three of us stared at the message in silence. Well, that's interesting timing, Margaret said dryly. Either she's more perceptive than you gave her credit for, or someone tipped her off that you might have heard about her comments. A chill ran down my spine as a new possibility occurred to me. What if she knows I know? What if this lunch invitation is her way of trying to control the narrative before I can confront her about it? Sarah frowned. But how would she know? You said you found out through Tom, and you haven't talked to any of your mutual friends about it since then. Tom? I said, the pieces suddenly clicking into place. What if Tom said something to her? He seemed genuinely concerned when he told me what she'd been saying. Maybe he thought he was helping by talking to her about it. Margaret nodded slowly. That would explain the timing of these messages. If she knows you're aware of the rumors, then this lunch invitation could be damage control. Or, Sarah offered, though she didn't sound convinced. It could be genuine remorse. Maybe Tom talking to her made her realize how her words were affecting you. I picked up my phone again and read both messages, trying to decode the subtext. I don't know how to respond. If I agree to meet her, am I walking into some kind of trap? But if I don't, am I missing my only chance to get real answers? There's no wrong choice here, Margaret said gently. But whatever you decide, make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. Don't meet with her because you feel obligated or because you think it's what you should do. And don't avoid meeting with her just because you're scared of what might happen. The afternoon sun had shifted lower in the sky, casting longer shadows across Margaret's porch. I realized I'd been sitting here for hours, and somehow that felt like exactly what I needed. These two people had given me their time and attention without asking for anything in return, listening to my problems and offering perspective without judgment. I think I want to meet with her, I said slowly. But not tomorrow. I need more time to figure out what I want to say and what I hope to accomplish. Sarah nodded approvingly. That sounds wise. You don't have to jump just because she snaps her fingers. I began typing a response, my fingers moving carefully over the screen. I'll tell her I can't do tomorrow, but maybe sometime next week. That gives me a few days to prepare myself mentally. As I hit send, I felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension wash over me. I'd committed to a path forward, but I had no idea where it would lead. Whatever happens with Linda, I said, looking at Margaret and Sarah, I want you both to know how grateful I am for this afternoon. I came here feeling completely lost, and you've helped me remember that not everyone in my life is going to let me down. Margaret reached over and squeezed my hand. That's what family is for. My phone buzzed with Linda's reply, and this time her response made my blood run cold. I stared at my phone screen, feeling the color drain from my face. Linda's reply was short and sharp. We need to talk now. I know what Tom told you, and you have it all wrong. Meet me at Riverside Park in an hour, or I'm coming to your house. What is it? Sarah asked, noticing my expression. I handed her the phone, watching as her eyebrows shot up. She passed it to Margaret, who read it twice before looking up at me with concern. Well, that's certainly a different tone than her first message, Margaret said carefully. The lunch invitation was all sweetness and light, but this feels almost threatening. She knows that Tom talked to me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But how could she know that? Unless... I trailed off, a horrible thought forming in my mind. Unless what? Sarah prompted. Unless Tom didn't just tell her that the rumors were hurting me. What if he told her exactly what he'd overheard, word for word? Or worse, what if she found out he was the one who warned me about what she'd been saying? Margaret set my phone down on the small table between us. The timing is suspicious, I'll give you that. Her first message was casual, friendly even. But this one came right after you said you couldn't meet tomorrow. It's like she panicked. I don't like the threatening undertone, Sarah said firmly. Telling you she's coming to your house if you don't meet her? That's manipulative behavior, and frankly, it's exactly the kind of thing that makes people think someone might be unstable. I felt a bitter laugh escape me. The irony isn't lost on me. She's been telling people I'm unpredictable and volatile, and now she's the one making demands and threats. You don't have to respond to this right away, Margaret said gently. In fact, I think you should take some time to really think about what you want to do here. But she said she'd come to my house? I protested. I can't have her showing up there, making a scene. What if the neighbors see? What if she really does something crazy and it just proves whatever she's been saying about me? Sarah leaned forward in her chair. Listen to yourself right now. You're so worried about what other people might think that you're ready to jump when she says jump. That's not healthy, and it's certainly not fair to you. Sarah's right, Margaret added. You're letting her control the situation completely. She sends a nice message, you consider meeting her. She sends a demanding message, and now you're panicking about neighbors and appearances. Where's your agency in all of this? I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache building behind my eyes. I don't know what the right thing to do is anymore. Every choice feels like it could backfire. What does your gut tell you? Margaret asked. Not your anxiety, not your fear of what people might think, but your actual instincts about Linda as a person? I closed my eyes and tried to push past the noise in my head. When I really thought about Linda, what came to mind wasn't the friend I'd thought I knew, but the calculating way she'd spread those rumors, the strategic targeting of mutual friends, the careful wording that made her sound concerned rather than malicious. I think she's scared, I said finally. I think Tom must have said something that made her realize I know what she's been doing, and now she's in damage control mode. And people in damage control mode can be unpredictable, Sarah observed, especially if they feel cornered. My phone buzzed again, and all three of us looked at it like it might explode. The message was from Linda again. I'm serious about coming over. We've been friends too long to let this get blown out of proportion. Now she's back to the friendship angle, I said, showing them the screen. It's like she's cycling through different approaches to see what works. Margaret stood up and began pacing the small porch. I think you need to take control of this conversation. Don't let her set the terms, the timeline, or the location. If you're going to talk to her, do it on your schedule and your terms. But what if she really does show up at my house? I asked. Then you don't answer the door, Sarah said simply. You're not obligated to let someone into your home just because they demand it. And if she makes a scene on your doorstep, well, that says a lot more about her character than it does about yours. I picked up my phone and stared at the keyboard, trying to formulate a response that wouldn't escalate the situation, but also wouldn't give Linda the upper hand. I could tell her I'm not available today, but that I'm willing to meet sometime next week in a public place, I said slowly. That way, I'm not completely shutting her down, but I'm also not giving in to her ultimatum. That sounds reasonable, Margaret agreed, settling back into her chair. But be prepared for her to push back. People who are used to controlling situations don't usually accept boundaries gracefully. I began typing carefully. I understand you want to talk, but I'm not available today. I'm happy to meet for coffee next week at a time that works for both of us. As I hit send, I felt my heart rate spike. What if this just makes everything worse? Then it makes everything worse, Sarah said matter-of-factly. But at least you'll be handling it with dignity instead of being manipulated into reacting exactly the way she wants you to. The response came back almost immediately, and when I read it, my hands started to shake. My phone screen displayed Linda's response, and the words made my stomach drop. I'm already in my car. I'll be there in 20 minutes whether you like it or not. We're settling this today. I showed the message to Sarah and Margaret, watching their expressions shift from concern to alarm. She's really coming, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She's actually driving over here right now. Margaret immediately stood up. Then we need to make a decision. Do we stay here with you, or do you want to handle this alone? I don't want to be alone, I admitted, feeling exposed and vulnerable. But I also don't want this to turn into some kind of confrontation with an audience. Sarah reached over and squeezed my hand. We're not an audience. We're your family. And if Linda has a problem with us being here, that tells you everything you need to know about her intentions. I looked between my sister and Margaret, realizing how much their presence had steadied me throughout this entire ordeal. Without them, I probably would have spent the last few days spiraling in confusion, second-guessing myself about what I'd discovered. You're right, I said, feeling some of my anxiety transform into resolve. This is my house, and I get to decide who's here when someone shows up uninvited. Margaret nodded approvingly. Good. Now, let's think about how you want to handle this conversation when she arrives. I keep coming back to what you said earlier about not letting her control the terms, I said. She's trying to force this confrontation on her timeline in the way she wants it to happen. Exactly, Sarah agreed. And the fact that she ignored your boundary about meeting next week shows that she's not interested in having a respectful conversation. She wants to bulldoze her way through this. We moved inside, and I found myself pacing between the kitchen and living room, my nervous energy building with each passing minute. Margaret settled into the chair by the window where she could see the driveway, while Sarah began making tea with the methodical precision she always employed when stressed. I keep thinking about all the times over the years when Linda did things like this, I said, pausing mid-pace. Showing up unannounced, pushing conversations when I wasn't ready, making decisions about our friendship without asking what I wanted. It's interesting that you're seeing the pattern now, Margaret observed. Sometimes it takes a big betrayal to help us recognize the smaller ones that came before. Sarah looked up from the tea preparation. Do you think that's why she spread those rumors about you being unpredictable? Because you've been getting better at setting boundaries with her? The question hit me like a physical blow. I'd been so focused on trying to understand Linda's motivations that I hadn't considered how my own growth might have threatened the dynamic she was used to. Oh my God, I said slowly. I think you might be right. The last few months, I have been saying no to her more. When she wanted to make plans I wasn't interested in. When she asked me to cover for her with other friends, when she tried to involve me in drama with people at her work. Margaret turned from the window. And instead of respecting your boundaries, she decided to undermine you with your mutual friends. Before I could respond, we heard a car door slam in the driveway. My heart immediately started racing, and I felt that familiar fight-or-flight response kick in. She's here, Margaret said quietly. Through the window, I could see Linda striding up the walkway with determined steps, her jaw set in a way that I recognized from previous confrontations. But this time, instead of feeling automatically guilty or defensive, I felt something different. I'm not the same person she thinks she's coming to manipulate, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. Sarah handed me a cup of tea. No, you're not, and she's about to find that out. The doorbell rang, followed immediately by insistent knocking. Linda's voice carried through the door, saccharine sweet, but with an edge of steel underneath. I know you're in there. Your car's in the driveway, and I saw the curtain move. We really need to talk. I looked at Sarah and Margaret, drawing strength from their presence, then walked to the door. But instead of opening it, I spoke through it. Linda, I told you I wasn't available today. I meant it. Come on, don't be ridiculous. Just open the door so we can clear this up like adults. The condescending tone in her voice sparked something in me. Adults respect each other's boundaries, Linda. Adults don't show up at someone's house after being told it's not a good time. There was a moment of silence, and then Linda's voice came back, but the sweet facade was cracking. Fine. If you want to do this through the door, we can do this through the door. But your neighbors are going to hear every word. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of months of manipulation settling on my shoulders. But this time, instead of crumbling under it, I felt myself standing straighter. Then let them hear, Linda. Let them hear how you're harassing someone who asked for space. Sarah moved closer to the door, her presence giving me courage. Margaret positioned herself near the window, keeping watch. Linda's voice came back sharper now. You're being completely unreasonable. All I did was express some concerns about your behavior to people who care about you. If you can't handle honest feedback from a friend, maybe the problem really is with you. The gaslighting was so blatant, so perfectly executed, that I almost admired the skill of it. But where once I might have started doubting myself, now I felt a strange clarity. Telling people I'm violent and unpredictable isn't expressing concern, Linda. It's character assassination. I never said you were violent. You told Jennifer I had anger management issues and that she should be careful around me when I'm stressed. There was a pause. When Linda spoke again, I could hear the calculation in her voice. I was worried about you. You've been so tense lately, so quick to snap at people. I thought maybe if your friends knew to give you some space when you're overwhelmed, it would help. Margaret rolled her eyes from her position by the window. She's really good at this, she whispered. I pressed my hand against the door, grounding myself. Linda, I have the text messages. I know exactly what you said and to whom. This isn't about concern. This is about control. Control? Are you hearing yourself right now? This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're being paranoid and hostile over nothing. Sarah stepped forward and spoke loud enough for Linda to hear through the door. She's not being paranoid when she has evidence? Who is that? Sarah? Of course you'd get your sister involved. You always need someone else to fight your battles for you. The insult hit its mark, and I felt that familiar shame creep up my throat. But then I remembered something Margaret had said earlier about recognizing the smaller manipulations. This was one of them, making me feel weak for having support. Having people who care about me isn't a weakness, Linda, and I'm not having Sarah fight my battles. I'm fighting my own battle, but I don't have to fight it alone. Fine. If this is how you want to handle a simple misunderstanding, then I guess I know where our friendship stands. It was the classic ultimatum, the final manipulation tactic. Accept the unacceptable behavior, or lose the relationship entirely. In the past, this threat would have sent me running to apologize and smooth things over. Instead, I found myself saying, "I guess you do." The silence that followed was deafening. I could almost feel Linda's shock through the door. Margaret moved away from the window. "She's walking back to her car." I heard the car door slam, the engine start, and the sound of tires on gravel as Linda drove away. Then I sank onto the couch, my legs suddenly shaky. "I can't believe I just did that," I said. Sarah sat down beside me. "How do you feel?" I took inventory of my emotions, expecting to find regret or panic. Instead, I found something I hadn't experienced in months when it came to Linda. "I feel free," I said, surprised by the truth of it. Terrified, but free. Margaret returned to her chair. "It's going to be hard for a while. She's not going to give up easily." "What do you mean?" "People like Linda don't accept rejection gracefully. She might escalate before she backs down. But you've already done the hardest part. You've stopped participating in the dynamic." Over the next hour, we talked through practical strategies. How to handle mutual friends who might try to mediate. How to document any further harassment. How to resist the urge to engage when Linda inevitably tried to pull me back into the drama. But mostly, we talked about something I'd never really understood before: the difference between being alone and being free. I kept thinking that losing her friendship would leave this huge hole in my life, I said. But now I'm realizing that the hole was already there. She was just filling it with anxiety and confusion. Sarah nodded. Real friends don't make you question your own reality. As the afternoon wore on, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. My phone stayed silent. There were no crisis texts to respond to, no dramatic emergencies that required my immediate attention, no walking on eggshells to avoid setting off another explosion. "Is this what normal relationships feel like?" I asked Margaret. She smiled. "This is what healthy boundaries feel like." And yes, once you get used to maintaining them, your relationships become much more peaceful. When Sarah finally had to leave for her evening shift, she hugged me tightly. "I'm proud of you. That took real courage. I couldn't have done it without you both here." "Maybe not today, but you could have done it. You're stronger than you think." After she left, Margaret and I sat in comfortable silence as the sun began to set. My phone buzzed once, a text from Linda that I deleted without reading. Then I turned the phone face down on the coffee table. "You know what I'm looking forward to most?" I said. "What's that?" "Making plans without wondering if they'll upset someone. Having conversations that don't feel like negotiations. Actually enjoying time with friends instead of managing everyone's emotions." Margaret smiled. "Those are good things to look forward to." As I prepared for bed that night, I realized that for the first time in months, I wasn't dreading the next day. I wasn't wondering what crisis would explode, what accusation would be thrown at me, what impossible standard I would fail to meet. Tomorrow would just be tomorrow, mine to live without fear.